I just want to say thanks for joining us today. The project I've been working on is called Inhale Garden. It is located in Vancouver, BC, at Crater Real Beach Park, Available Beach Park, or commonly known as Crab Park, and it's near downtown Vancouver. Zooming in a little closer, it's near Gastown and downtown East Side, as well as in an industrial area. We have a road that bridges over, comes along here, and then we also have a train yard here. So my site analysis, we have a lot of noise in this area, particularly from the south, the main access from the east, and a design constraint that I'll get into later is the playground here. My site is along this area here. So for my problem, I decided to look into drug addiction and drug overdose, particularly in the downtown east side and British Columbia as a whole. In the last 10 years, we can see that drug overdose has spiked up quite considerably. And besides the drugs themselves, a big problem is people who use alone. There's been some projects that have tried to mitigate this, and one is Insight, which has done a great job, supervised injection site. But it does have a very clinical feeling to it, as well as you can't smoke inside. And that's a pretty big issue since, according to these statistics, 39% of people who overdose do so from smoking. And this is even higher with people between the ages of 19 and 29, as well as males. So with that, I want to bring people struggling with drug addiction out of their everyday experience and bridge the gap between addiction and treatment. But the ultimate question is, what does this actually look like? And my site, for context, is right over here. It's the playground. So struggling with this, I went to the drawing board and broke my site into 3 aspects: the supervised kind of insight feel garden, the social garden, where people could interact with social workers and with other users, and then a public space where people could engage with the public and try to change that perception of drug use. I also looked into the senses of the space, so sight being one of them. Smell would be really big since smoke has a pungent odor, so kind of trying to cover that up, as well as maybe evoking some memory there, and touch as well for people to engage with the landscape a bit. Zooming out a little bit, I try to diagram these boobs. I made a wall that would block out the sound from the south and from the west, and eventually even brought this out even further and decided to design social space for social restoration and an introspective space. So with that, I created a area where it has a bosque, trying to get away from that insight room feeling, where people could talk with one another and engage with one another. We're also having these spaces of refuge along here, and then a braided pathway that would be a more public space that eventually goes up to the lookout. And then playgrounds over here, so I made a barrier that would separate that. And moving on to my next iteration, I took away that barrier and put more planting there to open it up a little bit more. I kept this undulating refuge area and continue this all the way along my site, as well as made a meandering pathway that made it more accessible for people to get up to the pergola. And for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to guide you through the bosque, into the meadow, and eventually up to the lookout. So in the bosque, we can see that I cut down into the landscape to get away from the noise from behind. I used planting to contrast against the formality of the bosque, as well as made this come down to the edge a bit to get away from the starkness of a wall being there. Some planting, I used a catsura tree for the smell of the bosque, as well as a lot of plants that are very pungent and very strong odored. I had to use a smoke bush since it is a smoke garden, and develop that around that. And my first perspective, I modeled it in Rhino and developed it in Twinmotion. You can see there's movable furniture for people to sit on and make the space their own, and the edge condition that comes down to the path here. Now we go from the bosque to the meadow. We have an area that people who are in the meadow won't be able to see into the bosque here. For the planting, I really ran with the smoke bush and had very fine textured plants that people could touch and experience, as well as flowers that would be blooming throughout the summer. From my perspective for this, we can see there's an element of exploration and mystery, and then there is a wayfinding marker for people to orient themselves. And as we go up from the meadow to the lookout, we have areas to sit, and at the lookout we have an area we have the lookout that goes to the ocean and mountains, as well as a bit to downtown Vancouver. And for this planting, I really wanted a native planting aesthetic, as well as I looked into some plants that helped with addiction. So the berberis helps, and the chamomile. We get some smell from the choisia, and we even get some taste from the thimbleberry, the rubus. And the perspective of this, where people could see out into the extending landscape and get out of their everyday experience this way. So in conclusion, I really want to see how far I could push what a garden can do and what a garden is. And I really want to really interested to hear what you guys think of this and how I can develop this even further.